The subject of a giant trade for the Knicks last year, Mikal Bridges had kind of an up and down first season with the Knicks. We're going to talk about his regular season versus playoffs, whether we're concerned about things on both ends of the floor with him, and the big important question, would we do the trade again right now on Locked On Knicks?
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at strick.land. And he's Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, and the Saturday host of the Locked On NBA podcast. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On today's show, we're going to be talking about Mikal Bridges, reviewing his season, the first of what will probably not end up being the entire roster of season reviews, because I think a lot of guys get sort of an incomplete, and there's no way we could possibly do a whole episode or even a whole segment. But Mikal Bridges certainly played enough to be part of the conversation. He played the most minutes in the NBA this year. Big decision, or big discussion, I guess I should say, to be had about whether he was worth what the Knicks paid for him last year, whether he was a playoff riser ultimately for them and gave them additive value in the playoffs versus the regular season, and what we think comes in the future for Mikal Bridges. So there's a lot to talk about on this episode. But first, we want to thank you all for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making this part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit the auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. All right, Gavin. So Mikal Bridges for the Knicks this year was, I'll just start with the big important stat that goes right along with all the things that we've talked about with the lineup playing a ton and blah, blah, blah. Mikal Bridges was at the head of the most played lineup in the NBA this year, for better or worse. He led the NBA in total minutes with 3,036 minutes. He was third in minutes per game at 37. You might ask, how is that? Well, it's because he played 82 games once again with no missed playoff games, keeping his extremely impressive Iron Man streak going at 7 years and counting. That he has not missed a game in his NBA career, which then, if you go even further back, the lore is that he has not missed a game since high school. So Mikal Bridges, the stretching works. He is the number one indicator that stretching works and can keep you on a basketball court more. But Gavin, with that number out of the way, where do you want to start with Mikal Bridges and reviewing his past season?
Yeah, so I think we want to get into some of the struggles, both in the regular season and in the playoffs, and what shifted, and what about it can be fixed, and what about it is like, ooh, this is a 5-alarm fire. He's not good at this thing anymore that he's supposed to be very good at. That was vague, but I'm sure a lot of you who've been watching know what I'm talking about there. Let's start off with the regular season offense, because I grouped it into kind of 4 categories. I think the defining feature of his regular season offensively, Alex, was inconsistent usage and inconsistent shooting that was certainly not buoyed by his shot profile. So for the regular season, he was 26th percentile in rim volume, so that is bad. You want to be high up on that number. He was 34th percentile in terms of his three-point attempts, 13th percentile in getting to the line, almost never got to the line, and was 89th percentile for mid-range, which is not really what you want in terms of modern NBA shot profile. Alex, I think he was hurt by really inconsistent usage. We discussed early season, you give up 5 first-round picks for this guy, and presumably part of that thought process was, yes, he was going to go back to being Phoenix Mikal Bridges in some way and was going to lean into the 3-and-D elements of his game. But I think where I disagree with people, who I've heard like, well, everyone knew he was supposed to be 3-and-D. He was upset with Tibbs, but like everyone knew on this roster that was his role. I do think he was supposed to have some usage as a primary, particularly when one or both of Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns are off the court. And I think Tom Thibodeau, one, just did not play him very much, where he was the number one offensive player on the floor with bench units. I think even when it was him and Cat, there weren't really a lot of plays called for him. And I think that really hurt him in terms of developing a rhythm on the offensive end. Obviously, he was also hurt by his own lack of aggression. Like Tibbs wasn't being like, all right, man, never drive to the rim. Like he decided that all on his own. And it's something we touched on to your point about him playing in all 82 games. Like, I think some of that is that he's just not a particularly aggressive. He's averse to contact. He's averse to physicality at times. And yes, that preserves him and that keeps him on the court, which is fantastic. But that's at the sacrifice of his efficiency to some extent. So I do think that really hurt him. The one positive note there is like we did see things really pick up when Jalen Brunson was not playing. In the 19 games this season without Jalen Brunson, of course, that one long stretch where he missed 15, he averaged 20 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3 assists per game. That was exciting 4.5 assists, 3 rebounds per game on 56, 38, 96 splits. So that is really good. The one other thing to touch on is the shot obviously was broken at the start of the year. And to some extent, he was able to fix it over the course of the season, but he was wildly inconsistent. You look at his 3-point shooting month to month, it's like 29, 43, 31, 39. Like he was up and down. And I think a lot of that, Alex, was that his form, like he was trying to find it over the course of the season. It was inconsistent and it was not ideal in terms of power generation because he would have that late hitch where he would pull the ball back. And because of that, he was very good from the corners, which takes less power. He's 43% on corner threes. He was just 31% from the wings from 3-point range. So that is something that I think for the Knicks to get the most out of Mikal Bridges is going to have to be fixed going forward.
Yeah, I think, to double back on the whether he was promised something more from Tibbs or by the team that Tibbs didn't deliver to him in terms of like how much he would be creating and whatever. I do think part of that is the lack of getting to the rim is what ultimately led to Tibbs not trusting him as much. I think if we know one thing about Tibbs, it's that the skill that he values the most out of a guard, whether you can make the shots or not, is a willingness and ableness to get all the way to the rim. Like it's something that he's rewarded time and time again. You can look all the way back to, obviously he had one of the better players at his peak, at his brief peak of all time to ever do that in Derrick Rose. That was like his favorite player ever to play. And then later on, who became, a stalwart for him again with the Knicks at a later age. And then like even looking back to like Alfred Payton with the Knicks, looking back to like I bring up these sort of guys all the time, like Nate Robinson, Aaron Brooks, like Marco Bellinelli, like guys that were just like they were able to do just enough to get to the rim. And that was enough for Tibbs to give them like a high amount of usage in Chicago. And then just various other players even this season that he rewarded on the Knicks, like Cameron Payne, who frankly is not a great finisher around the rim, but can certainly get there like all day. He can break somebody down off the dribble, blow by them, get all the way to the rim. And then what he does there, that's the real mystery. But the fact that he can get there is something that Tibbs loves and values in players, particularly guys that he's going to have running his offense. And that's just not something that Mikal Bridges does consistently. And it's something that I think he started trying to do a little more towards the end of the year, which I don't think it's a coincidence then that like, especially when Brunson was out, he was getting to the rim more. I think that Tibbs was rewarding that by having him initiate more. I think we saw during the stretch, I didn't pull like the number, but anecdotally, the stretch when Brunson was out, I think you saw just as much of Mikal, if not more, handling the ball than like Josh Hart, for example, who is another like classic, can get to the rim, Tibbs loves him kind of guy that he often tasks with running the offense. So I do think that that's definitely part of what held him back a bit this year. And hopefully that's something that he recognizes that with the next coach says, you know what, like it's probably not just a Tibbs thing. Like pretty much every coach in the NBA in today's NBA is going to be upset if you're consistently sacrificing what could be a rim opportunity and could be free throws for, no matter how good you are at them, a mid-range shot. Like a mid-range shot is just in today's game, like it's a great thing to have in your bag, but it's not a great thing to rely on as your number one thing. And for Mikal this year, with how he shot from three, it did kind of become his number one thing because he had his lowest 3-point percentage since his rookie season, which is crazy. 35.4%. Lowest otherwise was 36.1% in his second season. And he shot, I think it was like 33% his rookie year. But he's shot no lower than 37% since 2020 to 21 before this year. So that might not seem like a lot, but like a couple percentage points here and there on your 3-point shot is pretty big, especially considering the huge 8 ball that he put himself behind early in the season, which I guess then is just kind of a testament actually to the work they did to pull that number out from the gutter, because he really did, to your point, start terrible at the beginning of this year. But yeah, I guess if we're talking a little bit about regular season versus playoffs, because you brought it up, like, tell me what you make of this number, because I thought this was staggering,
Yeah.
and we kind of knew it already anyway. But per Basketball Reference, regular season, he was a plus 5.9 on off. So the team was about 6 points better per 100 possessions with him on the floor versus off. Playoffs, he was an absolutely staggering minus 25.3. Is some of that on him, or is that more on the doomed starting lineup that Tibbs rode with for entirely too long?
That I did not know that. He was minus 25.3 per 100 possessions the whole playoffs.
According to Basketball Reference,
Jesus
yes, on
Christ.
off. Yep.
Wow.
He was actually, so he was a minus 21
Yeah.
or something, but then the team, other than like when he wasn't on the floor, was a plus 4.
Gotcha.
So anytime he wasn't, so like the
Yeah,
combined net
the
is
difference.
minus 25. Yeah.
Wow. I'm befuddled. I'm almost too befuddled by that number to answer your question. I would not put that on him for the most part. I do think it speaks to something we've touched on a lot, that obviously the starting lineup didn't work, though that was also true during the regular season. I think maybe the counterpoint would be during the regular season, I would have to go back and look at this, that perhaps he got more run with the bench units that were pretty productive. And also, I think the biggest thing in the playoffs is just that, like, I mean, it was true for him and OG, but neither of those guys really shot the ball well. Teams, like, I think in particular, Detroit was pretty good at this. I don't think Boston was, and I can't really totally conceptualize with Indiana, like, just really didn't always respect him as a shooter and was kind of daring him to take threes at times. And I think the way, obviously Josh Hart more than anyone, but at times the way Mikal was guarded certainly affected that, because we'll get into it. But I do think in some ways he was better in the playoffs. His shot profile was essentially identical to the regular season, and he shot substantially worse in a couple of different areas. Like his, let me pull it up. He was 22nd percentile in points per shot attempt in the playoffs, after being 72nd percentile in points per shot attempt in the regular season. And he was much worse at the rim in particular. He was quite a bit worse from three, where he went from above average to substantially below average. He's more turnover prone. So his offense definitely took a step back. I think his defense was better, but maybe just hurt by the fact that, like, again, the Knicks were like quite good whenever Deuce was in there and they had like a real quality, high volume 3-point threat. I just think that opened up everything offensively. And it was something, Alex, we talked about going back to this preseason, but it was where you were going to really struggle. Even if Mikal had like a quote unquote good shooting season by his standards, going from his spacing, which is toe on the line spacing, from Dante DiVincenzo's, which is like 6 feet beyond the arc, willing to shoot it whenever spacing, that really hurt the Knicks. And they only really got that back when Deuce was in there. And I think that was a theme all season, particularly in the context of the Knicks starting Josh Hart.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we should talk a little bit more about Mikal's offense and his defense, what we liked, what we didn't like, and just in general thoughts on if the experience lived up to what we were expecting it to be. So we'll do that in just a moment when we get back in to Locked On Knicks. But first, I want to let you all know about our friends over at DoorDash. And NBA fans, you know what time it is. Playoff season means big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more. Use the code WINGSTOP50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. And look, hey, I'm not going to run away from the truth here. The window for this offer shrinks by the day. The amount of ability to have a 50-point score, particularly with these two very democratic offenses in the conference finals right now, it shrinks by the minute. But I believe in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to put it to Tyrese Halliburton and the Pacers and put up a 50 burger and get us all wings with his burger. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50 plus in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 plus order and code Wingstop50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. All right, we're back in to keep talking through Mikal Bridges. And Gavin, we kind of went through the numbers, so I think we can kind of go a little more vibey this segment. But in general, we were talking about this even just texting before we started this. I think we should start with the defense.
Yeah.
Overall thoughts on defense for Mikal this season. I mean, I think I was saying to you, I'm of the opinion that not too much changed for me in the playoffs versus the regular season in terms of what I felt he was capable of. I think there were some times where during the playoffs he was able to be used better in the sense that, like, in the Detroit series, I think he at times was the antidote to the Cade Cunningham problem of trying to stop him, but other times was not doing super great, but benefited greatly from the fact that they could just put OG Anunoby on him for spells because Cade was like that unique blend of distributor point guard type player, but also a large dude that is not the fastest. That like OG could stay in front of him pretty easily. So could Mikal, so they could kind of like vary their coverages on him a bit. Against the Celtics, I think he benefited greatly from, and we agreed on this, like being able to play off ball more. The fact that OG was the primary defender on Tatum was a huge boon to Mikal because that allowed him to just be the help guy. I mean, we even saw like on the ceiling possession of game 2, like how that came into play where he was able to cheat over, get that final steal on Tatum. And, you know, we now know essentially seal that series in that moment, like, because that was huge. The Knicks needed that 2-0 lead to ultimately come away with that series. And then we saw obviously in the Pacers series, like some of the things that had come up during the regular season in terms of him not being a great screen navigator come to light. I don't know how much I blame the screen navigation on, like, some of it. Again, it's sort of like the getting to the rim thing. It almost feels like self-preservation to me in a way. Like when Tibbs would throw him on the other team's best player and just be like, yeah, go out there and like get the crap kicked out of you on screens for 48 minutes, like or damn near it, like 40 minutes, whatever. Like you're going to match every minute that the other team's best players out there, and you're going to have to try to stick to them like glue. And he was not able to do that all that successfully. You brought it up. I think it was our buddies at the Hot Hand Theory had this stat that he was like the standard bearer for futility of getting over screens this year. He's like first percentile. So that's not great. And it's not necessarily an ideal role for him. And yet it was one that he was kind of thrust into a lot. How much does that color your perception of what his impact was on defense this year?
Yeah, that's sort of the whole question. It's so interesting, like to talk to people and be like, all right, what are you more concerned about, the offense or the defense? The answer is like kind of both. But if you had to pick one, it probably would be the defense, because when he was on the Suns, like, unless I'm totally misconstruing it, what we heard all offseason was like he was known as an elite screen navigator, and that went away in Brooklyn. And the assumption from everyone was kind of like, all right, but it'll come back because he's on a real team and he's going to try harder and he's going to have less time with the ball, so he'll have more energy on defense. To your point, I think there was a stat out there that he navigated, whether it was the most this season or the most all time, like he navigated something close to a record number of screens this year. And of course, he had to do that with Kat as his dance partner. And I think that they're like, as much as you want to like decry the lack of effort and the lack of physicality at times, which like there's no excuse for it. Like he wasn't playing hard enough. He wasn't like quick enough to get around screens. Like he just looked stiff and slow. And if there's one word to sum it up, lethargic at times. I cannot deny that he was definitely hurt by Kat's general like apathy, lack of skill, and what we heard in the Athletic piece at the end of the season, like Kat often not knowing the coverage or being in the right coverage. And I'm sure at a certain point, Mikal was like, all right, screw this. I'm not getting killed every time. Just so this like lumbering oaf, love you, Kat. We'll talk about you in your review. He's going to be in the wrong spot over and over again and screw up what I do. And to that point, like I think Mikal mostly looked pretty good in screen navigation when Mitchell Robinson was his partner, and he had elite drop defender next to him playing that coverage. But overall, he was awful in drop all year. You said at first percentile in the regular season. And in the Pacers series, which was the first time he really had to play in that defense again, because even though he was on the ball at times against Detroit, remember the Knicks were blitzing Cade a lot with Cat, which helped him because it meant he didn't have to get around that screen the same way he normally would if Cat were in drop. And I thought he was fantastic on Cade Cunningham for the bulk of the series. Maybe 1 or 2 games where it wasn't perfect, but given like our concerns coming into that series about what Cade did against him in the regular season, the way he held up like physically and walled up was really good. The level of intensity from him on the defensive end of the floor, similar to his 3-point shooting, I thought vacillated wildly in the regular season. Like there were moments, like there was one game against Trae Young, there was a couple of possessions against Shaedon Sharpe. And it sounds weird to point out like sample size that small, but you could see him lock in, and all of a sudden he looked like an all-world defender. To your point, against the Boston Celtics, he all of a sudden looked like an all-world defender, like the play he made at the end of game 2, the play he made at the end of game 1, where he anticipates that pass to Jaylen Brown, and for a guy known for his lack of physicality, rips the ball out of his hands. Like those are Draymond Green type defensive player of the year type of plays that, and you see those in that setting against the defending champions, and you're like, hell yeah, this guy's worth 5 first-round picks. You see what he did offensively in the fourth quarter of game 2 against the Celtics. You say, hell yeah, that guy's worth 5 first-round picks. And it's Alex, what makes him so incredibly hard to talk about, because the highs, like I would do that trade a million times over. And the lows, you're like, all right, I don't care if we get 1 pick back, get this dude off my team. So it is so complicated because we saw the flashes, but they were just so inconsistent.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, like, effort level wise or engagement level wise, if that's just a sort of a symptom of the Tibbs experience and the
Yeah.
fact that he was clearly not happy with the role that Tibbs cast him in this year.
Mhm.
And I mean, look, you and I are not plugged in like this for the most part, like, but I don't think it's a hot take to say that I feel like probably the 2 most dissenting voices of Tibbs in those exit interviews would have probably been Mikal and Cat. Cat, we obviously know that he already was not the biggest Tibbs fan, but it seemed like Mikal, it was night and day sometimes, to your point of what it seemed like he was willing to do or what he seemed capable of doing. Some games he would just look completely invisible. Other games he would completely swing a game with his aggression. And, we saw during like we already mentioned during the Brunson injury, when Brunson sprained his ankle, that, he was great. He was key to that whole run.
Mhm.
Like him and OG really stepped up during that and both became like alpha scorers and were honestly even more so than Cat, like carrying the offense during that time, I think, and carrying what the team was able to do just by virtue of being aggressive and trying new things. And like, I don't know. I mean, some of it was like OG just randomly becoming super saucy with what
Yeah.
he could do with the ball in his hands. But with Mikal, it was just kind of like committing more towards getting all the way to the rim, running pick and rolls more, like
Yeah.
all the little things, and it all seemed to work. So I don't know. That's going to be one of the great challenges for the next coach is managing all the personalities on this team, and Mikal is certainly one of them. And I think that I guess maybe one sort of illuminating thing to me this year is that I figured that he was always kind of just the slot him in, he'll do his role no matter what type of guy.
Mhm.
But maybe that run with Brooklyn and getting a taste of being like the number 1 guy, even on a bad team, has sort of instilled in him a little bit of like wanting what's his and wanting more opportunities. And overall, the guy has pride. Everybody has pride. They're all really good basketball players and they're all trying to be their best selves. And in Mikal's case, he's trying to earn himself a new contract with this very team. When that's all the case, like that all goes into how these guys ultimately perform sometimes because they are only human. And I think maybe we saw a little bit of Mikal like being a little unhappy and that spilling onto the court sometimes this year. Which obviously in some of the most important moments it did not, which is great. Which is why he was able to really crush it at certain times during the playoffs. But Gavin, I think we've been dancing around the ultimate question here, which is would we do the 5-pick trade all over again? So we're going to ask that in just a second and give our responses to that when we get back in for our final segment of Locked On Knicks.
But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, hey, hey, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's incredibly easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. They offer surprising insights. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Too much. Now I budget smarter and I save more. They also offer all-in-one convenience. So instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan out long-term goals. My favorite part is they offer easy collaboration. Managing money with your partner is easier than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. And trust me, it can be stressful. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA, monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right. We delayed the inevitable long enough. Would we do the trade over again? And I think important context to this conversation, and one that many have pointed out before us, but part of that has to be, does Jalen Brunson still agree to take a massive discount if you don't make that trade for Mikal Bridges? And I think I have to assume that was part of the Knicks' rationale and trying to make Jalen happy. My instinct is for like a similar player, Jalen would have done it anyways, because I think it was less so about his buddy and maybe even more so about just locking in a championship window for the Knicks. But I also think it certainly didn't hurt that it was his buddy. That being said, at this point, Alex, it's hard to justify with the names that are out there on the market this year, namely Giannis, that those 5 picks could have certainly gone towards getting, and the Knicks making a compelling offer and being close to the top of the heap. I don't think I would have done it in retrospect. And to be clear, that is complete Monday morning quarterbacking for me, because I was happy with the trade at the time. And I thought the idealized version of Mikal Bridges, like the apex version of him defensively, the apex version of him offensively, was pretty close to a perfect fit on this team. And honestly, I still believe that. I have some very real questions about if we're going to see that again. I'll throw in this final caveat before throwing it to you. I say that I don't think that's necessarily going to be my answer forever. I do think with an offseason to potentially get his rhythm back in terms of his shot, with a coach that might optimize his usage on both ends of the floor a little bit better, I still think there's a player in there that might be worth that pick out load, especially given the deal that Brunson took. Right now, it's a little bit hard to say that, given both how he played and the opportunity cost of what the Knicks could have done with those picks.
Yeah, I guess my answer is going to be sort of a cop-out, but I give this sort of an incomplete at the moment, if I'm being honest. Like, it's tough to really say, like, yes, would I do it again or not? Because there's still a few factors that haven't been determined yet, right? Like, one is, what does his next contract look like? Because we're not very far away from that. I think it's actually just this next season that he has on his deal, which is frankly a value. I mean, he only makes like 20 something million, which is
also part of the trade, to be clear.
Right. Which is part of like, which is part of him, like being a good value, no matter what he produced this year. Like, even though it was arguably a little underwhelming, like, to do that for 23 million when there are players that are signing deals now that will pay them 80 million. Like, he was well worth the money that he's getting paid. He's only getting paid like fractionally more than Josh Hart, for example. He's going to make 25 million this next year. There were reports very shortly after the trade and very shortly after Brunson's deal that Mikal might take a very similar type of deal as what Brunson did, sort of a sweetheart deal for the Knicks in a way, so that he can keep playing with his, with one of his best buddies and Brunson, 2 of his best buddies, and him and Josh Hart. Like, there's some factors there in terms of what can make this deal look better in the long term. Like, if he signs for less than what OG signed for example, like a contract that starts at, I don't know, like 35 million or something like that, then you know what? Yeah, that's a really good deal. And those picks are way easier to swallow because you're not paying this guy like $50 million or whatever. Like, if you're not paying him like what Cat is getting, it's like, it's a much easier pill to swallow if he's not like a superstar. That said, you wish that he could be more like Brunson, where it's like, oh, this guy is so underpaid that it's like criminal. Like, you'd prefer if it could be that. So that's thing one. Thing two, I feel like this is how I'm going to end almost every single one of these player reviews. And I was telling you a little bit before the show, like I'm almost to the point. It's so weird. We should be really excited to do these player reviews, and we should be really excited about like, wow, this team just made the Eastern Conference Finals
Mhm.
and everything else. And yet, there was just a certain quality about this season that was so exhausting from the fact that like there just was very little attention paid to what was working, what wasn't working, how to improve, things of that nature by Tibbs. And for that reason, I feel like there's almost like if we were going to do a grading scale for Mikal or like a number of other players for this year, I almost feel like it's sort of an incomplete grade because it just feels like we didn't see what could be the best version of Mikal Bridges this year. We didn't see like uh, how he could be best utilized given what his current skill set is. Like any other coach would look at those numbers that we saw that like again that like hot hand theory pulled that other people pulled like that b-ball index themselves put out a number of times during the year about like his screen navigation and stuff and being like maybe this guy's not the ideal guy to put on the other team's best point guard or whatever like we
Sure.
thought he might be. Maybe there's another avenue to take here. Maybe that's starting Deuce McBride or trying to match Deuce's minutes to like a top point guard if you're facing a team like that. Maybe there's, other ways to deploy him that can make him way more valuable, like when we saw him being able to kind of freelance like he did in the Boston series and influence the series that way. And yet there was just so little effort by Tibbs to do that stuff unless it was just like shoved down his throat. Like even the Boston one, it's like I don't think he wanted to not have Mikal on the ball. It's just that OG was a more sensible matchup for Jason Tatum, who was going to be handling it most of the time. And therefore, that was what the matchup was. And therefore, Mikal got to freelance off the ball a bit because that's just how Boston plays.
Sure.
But like, I think if Derek White was bringing the ball down the floor the whole time, that Tibbs would have just been like, yeah, business as usual. Just like let's
Mhm.
keep Mikal on him, and whether he gets burned or not, who cares? Like that's his job. He's out there to guard the opposing best player. And then same stuff for the offense. It's like it seemed like there was so little effort put into getting him into a rhythm. There was, I think, not enough effort put into designing like back cuts for him, like putting him in situations where he would have to try to finish, where it's like,
Mhm.
bro, here's an open layup. Like, if you don't go for this, like, we got a problem here. Like, and you're gonna have talking to. Because there was always like reasonable doubt of like, well, I guess maybe in his mind he made the right decision because he was driving into kind of a crowded paint and there wasn't like a perfect lane for him to go for a layup there. So okay, if he felt more comfortable with the midi, whatever. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think all it comes down to for me is like I just think we need to see a whatever the new coach does with him. I think there's a chance that he looks way, way better next year. But there's also a chance that maybe he comes out and looks the same. And then we have to start asking more existential questions of like, crap, did the Knicks trade for a guy right as his prime was about to decelerate? Um, and if that's the case, then that's a bridge we'll just have to cross when they get there. But
Well, it's a bridges we'll have to cross when
it's
we
a
get
bridges, yeah, it's two whole bridges we'll have to
there. Yeah,
cross,
at
perhaps
least.
even more, maybe three
Yeah,
bridges.
could be 5.
Um,
I don't know.
could be five bridges. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. But either way, yeah, it's one of those things where it's I think we need one more year to make a full assessment of this deal because again, on top of everything else too, this team was put together sort of on the fly during training camp. And like, I think the training camp excuse is weak, but it's not so weak when you consider the coach that everybody played for and the fact that Tibbs makes them practice so little during the season and that they work on so few new things throughout the year from the outside looking in that I think we need probably another year to really make a judgment on whether this trade was worth it. And for that reason, I will just hedge and say I think it was good business at the time. I think they didn't have to give up players, which was huge because they were trying to build a complete roster
Mhm.
and a roster that could potentially compete for a championship. And you know what? At the end of the day, they did do that in a roundabout way. I don't think they would have won the championship, but they did have a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals no matter what, and you can't take that away from them. So from that perspective, I think it was a good trade. I think at this juncture, I would probably still do it if it comes to light in the next year or so that even with a new coach and even with a better role and everything else, that Mikal is kind of still the same guy that we saw this year, then maybe I start walking that back a little bit and saying, you know what, maybe the trade was not the best investment in the world given everything else.
Yeah, no, it's fair. And you always have to take into account this stuff. Like when you say, oh, those 5 first-round picks could have gone for Giannis. Obviously, Giannis makes way more money. So then you're not just trading like quote unquote Mikal's package, like you're also trading Cat or OG, or I know people wouldn't mind it at this point, but Josh Hart and some other stuff. So that has to be taken into account. Last thing I'll say is I do think he will shoot the ball better next season. Like it was clear from the start of the year that he was messing around with and trying to find his form throughout the season. Anyone at any level of basketball knows it is like the worst thing in the world if your form is not set to try to find it under live game action. And in a regular season where you don't have a lot of time to practice, I'm going to say it's pretty extraordinary that he ended up shooting as well as he did. So I'm encouraged. I think it can look a lot better. I think it will look a lot better. I question the mental side a little bit, but I also think not having Tibbs will help, because clearly he does not like Tom Thibodeau. On that happy and fitting note, we'll wrap up this edition of the Locked On Knicks podcast. And we'll talk to you soon with more player reviews, more of the coaches, and hopefully some draft coverage in the near days on Locked On Knicks.